I was raised Baptist.
Back,
We were medium serious about being Baptist. We would go, kind of in waves and phases to church. I was a wild teenager, did a lot of partying and had fun, and then started getting into evangelical type Bible study stuff when I was 18, 19. I kind of worked my way back through church history. So going from evangelical Protestantism into the classic Reformation people, Luther, Calvin, etc. And then that led me to doing a year of Protestant seminary. And then I got into reading church history, church fathers, again, kind of working my way gradually back through the history of the church and reading a lot of Aquinas, a lot of Augustine. And that led me to become a Roman Catholic in 2003. So most of my 20s, I got pretty hardcore into traditional Catholicism. I went to the SSPX Mass for about 7 or 8 years, fairly consistently. And then at a certain point, I kind of got burnt out on theology, Western theology, kind of took a hiatus from any Roman Catholic attendance at all. Read a lot of perennialist stuff, read a lot of Neoplatonic stuff, read a lot of Plato. And I was really just burnt out on what I saw as a real discrepancy between the pre-Vatican II teachings and the post-Vatican II teachings, and the viability of different traditional Catholic movements, whether they were really doable, workable, whether they were really consistent, or whether I was just trying to make this system work. And maybe the problem was actually in the system. So just kind of got burnt out, as I said. Spent probably about 5 or 6 years just reading all kinds of stuff. I didn't exactly adopt atheism or agnosticism. I just was kind of in the I don't know phase. And then I started reading St. Maximus again, the confessor, famous Orthodox philosopher. So I was always drawn to kind of philosophical-minded approaches to religion and theology. And then I got into other Orthodox theologians like Father Staniloy, who was very philosophical as well. I found his writings very convincing. Was motivated and moved by a lot of Father Seraphim Rose's books that also kind of helped me warm up again to Orthodoxy, because I'd kind of had a phase of looking at Orthodoxy in 2007, but I just set it aside. I didn't really pursue it any further because I saw a lot of liberalism in the Orthodox world at that time. And back in the 2007 era internet, there weren't a whole lot of Orthodox blogs or websites. There was one or two. So there just wasn't a lot of resources. And I was pretty far away from any Orthodox church, so it just didn't really seem like a viable option for me. And then come 2015, 16, I've been reading a lot more Orthodox stuff again after I'd kind of come full circle. I'd gotten back into biblical theology, which I was really into when I was in my Protestant and Catholic phases. And so eventually I just thought, well, maybe I should give more, credence to Orthodoxy, and read just tons and tons of Eastern Fathers and Orthodox theologians. And so I just kind of read my way into it, which is not to say that it's purely intellectual, because you do have to go beyond just that intellectual domain, and it has to kind of be actualized in your life. So you have to go through catechesis, you have to go through, the being received into the church, you have to live in the liturgical life of the church. So compared to the other approaches, I would say it's a much more serious, demanding kind of commitment than what you would experience in anything like Protestantism, or even traditional Catholicism doesn't really have the kind of expectations and the relationship between you and, say, a spiritual father as it is in Orthodoxy. So long story short, I officially became a catechumen in 2017 and was received in 2018, I think.
Kind of interesting how there were some parallels between your journey and Tristan's. Now, how do I sound now, chat? Am I too loud still, or now too quiet? They're going to say, "Oh, no, you're too quiet." How do I sound? Come on, Otis.
Good to me.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So I'm going to ask my next question here, which is dissidents tend to be into traditionalism, and I noticed you both mentioned that you'd read some of the perennialists. I've covered some of the perennialists on this channel. Specifically, I did a Julius Evola day, but through him we've also read some Guinon and various others. But anyway, dissidents tend to be into the idea of tradition. They're into their own heritage and their history. But since the Orthodox Church is strongly associated with Russia and with Eastern Europe and with Greece, isn't it a bit strange that people from Western Europe and, from the Americas are converting? What is the attraction, do you think, to Orthodox Christianity?
My response would be that it's actually not foreign. So Orthodoxy, we believe, is also the Catholic Church, right? We just don't think it's the Roman Catholic Church identified with the Papal See. We think that it has all the other elements of Catholicity that make it Catholic in the sense of universality, the fullness of truth, apostolic succession, tradition. It's in all the, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church, as the Creed says. And so we see the church as fundamentally that. It does have its unique expressions in time and space through various liturgies or languages or people groups or nation states. It even bears the stamp of the Byzantine Empire still in the vestments. So the Orthodox Church bears a lot of historical stamps, but it's not reducible to any of those single historical nation state stamps or even the Byzantine Imperium. The model of the Byzantine Imperium was the notion of balancing the one and the many in the Imperium. So the idea was that the nation states wouldn't lose their national identities or their particular ethnos or their cultural heritage, but they would be balanced in this universal profession of faith at the same time as retaining their distinct nationalities. And that was what gave the Byzantine Empire its impetus and its power for many years, many centuries, and made it so successful. I think in part, ultimately, I think it was the true faith. But we wouldn't reduce the faith to any of those ethnic expressions, and that does happen in the Orthodox world. We don't think that that's ideal. It's not how it should be, but that isn't unique to the Orthodox world either. It also occurs in elements of traditional Roman Catholicism or even non-traditional Roman Catholicism, where you have Catholicism. Roman Catholicism is basically identical to your ethnic heritage or your Polish identity. It happens historically with Protestant churches as well, where you have, to be a Calvinist is to be in Geneva in Switzerland. You can have national Protestant churches doing the exact same move. And for us, it's just a inversion of the proper ordering of those hierarchies, where the universality of the religious profession is first and foremost as the universal Catholic faith. Then underneath that would be, your national or your social expression given your people group or your language or your heritage, be it Russian, Serbian, Romanian, whatever. Mm-hmm. And one last point I would say is that for us, in our view, the actual historic church in the West is Orthodox, right? So for us, the Orthodox Church is in the West for the first 1,000 years. So from our vantage point, English-speaking peoples, Western peoples, aren't leaving their heritage for something foreign, because, for example, a couple of months ago, I attended several times at a Latin Rite Orthodox parish. And so it's under the jurisdiction of ROCOR, but it's basically the Latin Mass in English. And there are quite a few of these in various jurisdictions in England and in the US and other countries, I presume. But, and so in that regard, that's attractive to a lot of people who are still very attached to the Latin Mass or the Latin Rite, which I don't have any problem with that. I think as long as people are getting the right catechesis and they're understanding the theology correctly, there's nothing wrong with the Latin Rite in Orthodox churches, and it's no different fundamentally than what you would experience in a traditional Latin Mass. And I think that Anglicans find that approachable as well, because in the Anglican tradition, you had an attempt to kind of go back to what was perceived to be the pre-Tridentine Western Rite liturgy. So it would appeal to both a traditional Catholic and to a more traditional-minded Anglican that the Western Rite of Orthodoxy is essentially the Western tradition.
Tristan, any thoughts on this?
Yeah. I think Jay gave a really good explanation there, but also, it's important to understand that not only is, putting ethnicity as the most important thing in your life, would that be a distortion of the gospel? It's antithetical to the gospel. It's antithetical to the nature of the church. It's not that nationalism is bad. It's not that ethnicity is bad, right? But to put that first is actually a great distortion, right? So the gospel say there's neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, neither male nor female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. Christ is all and in all. in the church, right? So it's not, if you putting ethnicity first is a major distortion. But
well, I would add too. That's a favorite. I know you're not doing this, Tristan, but that's a favorite text of so-called Orthodox or so-called liberals. Well, there actually are, I guess you could say liberals are actually postmodernists. They'll use that text to try to say that, you see, Paul's saying that gender doesn't exist. People groups don't exist.
Right.
Paul goes on immediately to talk about rules in the church for women and men. Women shouldn't be teachers, for example, right? So Paul certainly did not have in mind some kind of like predecessor to today's TRANS type stuff. Which is
it's not about wiping away your ethnicity. Right?
Yeah, it doesn't even wipe. Right. So notice in iconography, everybody retains their lineage, right? Moses the Black is still a black guy in an icon. Christ is still a person of Hebrew descent, right?
Yeah, when you look at certain, like the Saint Innocent of Alaska, for instance, when he evangelized to the people of Alaska, he lived with them for a few years before he even started to preach the gospel, right? So, and there were parts of their culture that were able to be baptized, right? These people still lived like Aleuts, but they became fully Orthodox. So to say that, maybe it's, what kind of a Westerner would want to become Orthodox because we think that Orthodoxy is Greek or is Russian. Orthodoxy is not Greek or Russian, and there is there is a Russian Patriarchate, there is a Greek Patriarchate. There's also a Patriarchate of Alexandria. There is there's a church in Serbia. So, but it's not ethnos doesn't come first. And I think Saint Justin Popovich in his book, The Orthodox Faith and the Life in Christ, and the Orthodox Church and Ecumenism. I think in both of those books, there's a great explanation on how ethnicity is not destroyed in Christ. In fact, it's something that is to embrace, but it's not the first principle, right?
Yeah. What I was just trying to express was sort of a response to the common pagan critique that Christianity is a universalizing religion that within it inherently has this desire to wreck and destroy and sort of blend everything into a Tower of Babel. That is not what we believe is supposed to be the case. In fact, the preservation and maintenance of unique heritage through liturgy is fundamental to Orthodoxy. So how could Orthodoxy, being that it accepts this one within the many unifying principle, and the notion of the one and the many being in balance, it's fundamentally anti-Orthodox to fall on either side of this extreme. On the one hand, of exalting ethnicity to the point of idolatry, that we call ethnophilatism, where it replaces the gospel. And at the same time, there's the opposite extreme of exalting the universal to the exclusion of the historical or the national or the individual expression. None of those things should be destroyed. And that's why we're always shooting for a balance between the one and the many. And even though, yes, through human failings, it doesn't always achieve its effect.